This is a sensitive topic and a long post, and I don't want to come across as a monster, but I sincerely would like some advice. I, 37-year-old female, and my husband, 41-year-old male, decided to become foster parents 5 years ago. We had one placement, 12-year-old male, who stayed with us for less than a week before going to a behavioral health facility in another state. Let's call him Isaac. Isaac was a busy kid, and he definitely had some difficult behaviors, but we honestly really enjoyed him and wanted the best for him. We even tried to convince the state to allow him to stay with us, but since we were new at foster parenting and outvoted by his team, they said no. But we kept in touch with him, and when he earned visits from the facility for good behavior, he would have them in our home. Isaac's parents were both in prison, and his legal guardian was his grandma, 74-year-old female. I'll call her Janet. Isaac had 2 siblings that also lived with Janet, but he was the only one placed in foster care because he had terrible anger issues at the time, and Janet couldn't handle it. Janet lives in a town about 20 minutes from our home. After Isaac finished his stay at the facility, he returned home to live with Janet and his little brother, 8-year-old male, and sister, 4-year-old female. Our home was always open to Isaac, but Janet fought for custody, and we were glad she cared enough to fight for him. For a while, everything seemed to be going well. My husband and I developed a friendly relationship with Janet, and over the span of 3 years, saw Isaac and his siblings at least 4 or 5 times a year. Janet would even allow them to come stay with us for 2 weeks in the summer, 4th of July, weekends once in a while, things like that. But everything changed when Isaac's mom got out of prison. We'll call her Melissa. Melissa had been in prison off and on since she was a teenager, mostly for substance abuse and distribution and selling herself. Melissa was a real piece of work. Right away, the tension in the home skyrocketed, and Melissa and Janet began fighting so often the police seemed to be there every week. Melissa was rude, entitled, mean to the kids, filthy, unhygienic, lazy, and spent most of the day on her phone talking to her customers. She paid no attention to her kids at all. Isaac called us often, begging us to come and get him and his siblings. Of course, we tried to get the state to intervene, but it was one of those situations where things were terrible, but not terrible enough, and we had a hard time getting enough proof for removal. It was gut-wrenching because those kids deserved better, and we had grown attached to them. After the cops had been called enough times, Janet eventually got kicked out of her apartment. She called us sobbing, blaming the entire thing on Melissa. That's when she asked me to take co-guardianship of Isaac and his siblings, so they could move in with us and not have to be in foster care. After a lot of deliberation, my husband and I agreed to do it, although only one of us could have co-guardianship, since Janet wanted to keep hers. The kids have lived with us for 2 years. In that time, we helped Janet get a new apartment, so the kids spent most of their weekends with her, and Melissa eventually ended up back in prison. It was a good arrangement, and we tried our best to get along with Janet, co-parent with her, and let the kids have the best of both their worlds. We have tried very hard to act like adults and never push them in one direction or another. We've made it clear that the more people who love them, the better, and that families look like all sorts of different things. Cut to 6 months ago. At this point, the kids all call me mom and my husband dad. We have not adopted them, but I am still their guardian, and our biological child thinks of them as siblings. It has been an enormous blessing for us to have these kids in our home, but probably one of the hardest things we've ever done. The kids have trauma I can't even begin to describe, but had gone to a lot of therapy and were settled and stable. Isaac still struggles with anger issues, but is no longer violent and has worked through the worst of it. He was getting his driver's license, and things weren't perfect, but they were good. Well, Melissa got out of prison again, and of course she moved in with Janet. We told Janet it was a bad idea, but nothing we said could convince her to turn Melissa away. Every time Melissa got out was the time she was finally going to turn it all around. Of course, that never happened, but Janet couldn't see it. The fighting started again. The substance using, the men, and the condition of Janet's home deteriorated so badly, I no longer felt comfortable leaving the kids there. It was so bad, when they got home after their visits, they had to strip in the garage and leave their bags outside so we could check them for lice, bed bugs, and cockroaches. We threw away a lot of things. It was hard on everyone, and I was getting to the point where I wanted to take legal action to take Janet's guardianship away, so the kids wouldn't be forced to go over there if they didn't want to. That's when, once again, Janet lost her apartment. The cops had been called too many times, for too many reasons. The place was trashed, and the landlord wanted her out. She had nowhere to go. 2 weeks ago, Janet asked if she could move an old, junky fifth-wheel trailer onto our property and live there until she could get a new apartment. I felt truly sorry for what she had been through, but I said no. If it were just Janet, I would maybe have considered it. But wherever Janet went, Melissa would eventually follow, and I didn't want Melissa on my property. Ever. The kids were devastated, especially Isaac. They love Janet, and they love Melissa, and they absolutely did not understand how we could leave them with nowhere to go but the crisis center. It was hard, because we often shelter the kids from the things Janet and Melissa say and do, because we want them to be kids and not have worry about things like this. They just don't understand why we all can't be one big happy family. Janet, of course, takes every opportunity to paint me as a heartless shrew who doesn't care about them. Last week, we met at a fast food place, and Janet cried the entire time about how hard it was for her not to have a place to go, or a home to see the kids in. The kids were eventually so upset that later I told Janet that none of what happened is their fault, and it wasn't fair of her to guilt them, or me into doing something we didn't feel comfortable with. She was furious, and hung up on me, with the phone we are paying for, by the way. I have never been unkind to Janet, but letting her live in my driveway is a boundary I'm not willing to cross. It's probably relevant to mention that Melissa is sharing a room with Janet at the center. The hardest part about it all is that Janet is a good grandma and loves the kids so much. She deserves some peace in her life. But she has no boundaries with Melissa, and that never-ending cycle is the reason the kids live with us in the first place. She protects them from everyone but Melissa. 2 days ago, Janet asked again if she could move a fifth wheel to our property. She swore up and down that she'd never let Melissa stay with her. But the truth is, I just don't believe it. Eventually, I think she'll feel bad and let Melissa move in, and then we'll be trapped. Isaac is so angry with me. He feels betrayed and says we're being horrible and cruel for leaving Janet in the crisis center. I don't want to hurt him, but I said no again. And now he acts like he hates me. He won't even look at me when he gets home, and it's awful that after so long he can't see anything from our side. We've done a lot to help the kids acclimate and have both their families in their lives, but shouldn't we be able to have some boundaries? I don't know anymore. Am I the idiot? Now, for a few comments before the update. Please let Isaac know the truth. The other kids need to know an age-appropriate version of the truth. Also, look at your city bylaws. Most towns don't allow living in trailers. If you allow that, you can be facing fines yourself. Use that as part of your excuse to not allow it. If you do allow it, Melissa will follow. The cops will be a constant visitor at your home, and you will lose the kids too. Maybe even your own child. Get Isaac more mental health supports. He is in a terrible position, not the idiot. But I think you need to hire a family counselor to help you work through this with Isaac. He needs to understand that your home has always been a refuge from chaos for him and his siblings, but that will end if you allow his grandmother to bring the chaos to your doorstep. Promises aside, the evidence shows that Janet allows Melissa to make her own life unstable, and you cannot afford to let the two of them make your home unstable as well. You have 4 kids to house. It's not worth the risk. Now, for the update, thanks for sticking around for this update. So, you remember how I said no to Janet about the trailer? Well, she went behind my back and convinced my husband to say yes. He didn't even talk to me about it. Just said yes to her, and next thing I know, there's a trailer in our driveway. I felt so betrayed. I mean, we're supposed to be a team, right? But there it was, this big, ugly trailer, and Janet moving in like she owned the place. I was mad, really mad. But I didn't say anything. I just let it happen, like I always do. I guess I thought if I made a fuss, it would upset the kids, and they've been through enough. But inside, I was boiling. My husband, he just kept saying it was temporary, that it was the right thing to do, but I knew better. I knew Melissa would show up sooner or later. And sure enough, not even a week later, there's Melissa, sneaking into the trailer in the middle of the night like some kind of cockroach. I caught her the next morning, trying to act all innocent like she was just visiting. But I wasn't born yesterday. I knew she was staying there, and Janet was letting her. I felt like such a fool, letting them walk all over me like that. The kids, they didn't know what to think. They were happy to have Janet close, but they could sense the tension. Isaac, he was still mad at me, but now he was mad at his grandma too, for bringing Melissa into the mix. It was a mess, a real mess. Then, 2 days ago, things got even worse. I got a call from the school. Isaac had gotten into a fight, a bad one. He was suspended, and the other kid, he was in the hospital. My heart just sank. We'd worked so hard to get him past his anger issues, and now this. It felt like everything was falling apart. I went to pick him up, and he was so full of rage, I barely recognized him. He blamed me, said it was all my fault for not letting Janet and Melissa just be happy. He said I was the reason everything was messed up. It hurt, you know? After everything we'd done for him to say that to me. But I didn't argue. I just took him home and tried to figure out what to do next. My husband, he was no help. He just kept saying we'd work it out, but I could tell he was starting to see that maybe letting Janet move in wasn't such a great idea after all. So now I'm stuck. I've got a husband who doesn't back me up, a grandma and a mother who are taking advantage of us, and a kid who thinks I'm the enemy. I'm trying to hold it all together, but it's hard. Really hard. Thanks for reading. My stepmother tries to ban my half-brother from our home and forces my wife to apologize, so I call a family meeting and make them all regret their bullying. I, 32-year-old male, have been married to my wife V, 29-year-old female, for 6 years. We have 3 kids. I have several siblings, but this instance revolves around a half-brother T, 18 years old, who lives out of state. T came to visit over his spring break. My stepmom has never liked T, mostly because she doesn't like his mother. About 3 days into T's visit, my stepmom kept making snarky comments about him, his mom, his family, school, his tattoo, etc. T got tired of this and grabbed his car keys and said he was leaving. This was around 11 p.m. My stepmom laughs and says he doesn't have enough gas to get home or money to get more. T said that he didn't need enough gas or money to get home, he just needed enough gas to get to my house. My stepmom laughs again and says I'm not even home, I'm at work, which was true. I work nights and that V, my wife, would never let him stay here. T says, I guess we'll see, because he knew V wouldn't tell him no and leaves. My stepmother then calls my wife and tells her that T is on his way to our house and under no circumstances is V to allow him to stay with us. V says she's not going to turn him away, especially not in the middle of the night, and that everybody can all talk about it tomorrow. She'll let me know to call my dad when I get a chance to figure out what's going on. My stepmom begins to get angry and says that T is not V's child to allow to do whatever he wants, and V needs to respect her as the mother of the family, and that she can make life in the family difficult for V if she needs to for V to understand her place. And that V has no right to let people into my home without my knowledge. There were other things said as well, and eventually V loses her patience and ends the call by saying that my stepmom is just mad she can't be a F-bomb, bully to T anymore because he found a loophole. My stepmother calls me while I'm at work and tells me V was rude to her. At this point, I have no idea that anything has happened. She then calls my dad, he works nights as well, and tells some version of events. My dad calls me and tells me that V was disrespectful and had no right to speak to her that way, and needs to apologize for her behavior. I get a call about 5 minutes later from V. She tells me that T is at our house, and they tell me everything that happened since V wasn't at the house, and T wasn't there yet for the call. I call my dad and tell him that it doesn't sound like V did anything, except stand up for herself, and my dad insists that V needs to apologize. I tell him if anybody is owed an apology, it's V. This was all 3 days ago. I'm getting texts from family members about V needing to apologize, and that V doesn't have the right to get involved with family squabbles, and she shouldn't have let T run away from the consequences of his actions. No one can tell me what the actions were. And if V doesn't apologize, then she's not welcome around anymore. I don't think she owes an apology, but I had a bad relationship with my family for years when I was younger, and since it's improved drastically, I've been a lot happier having them in my life, and I don't want to lose that, but I also can't just allow someone in it to disrespect my wife so blatantly and expect an apology for it. But V at this point is starting to feel bad, and she always stresses too much over absolutely anything she thinks she might have done to upset someone. So this really sent her on a series of mental gymnastics. And she says she doesn't want to be the reason I have a bad relationship with my family yet again. I've remained firm that she doesn't owe them anything. But am I the idiot for not having her do it just to get it over with? Now, for a few comments before the update. Comment 1. Just remind V she didn't do anything to affect your relationship with your family. Stepmom did, not the idiot. You better not back down. Having your partner's back is generally the best bet. Let your dad and family know your clear boundaries and why. If they want to continue with the nonsense, that's on them. Remember, family is what you make, not a chance of genetics. Sometimes you have to restrict contact. They may need to be kept at arm's length for the rest of your life. Some folks thrive on being jerks and toxic energy. Let them feed that need somewhere else. Comment 2, not the idiot. The stepmom sounds like she's on a power trip. Can you tell your dad everything V said threatened? That her dislike of T is also putting a wedge between you and your dad too? You were right to stand up for your wife and T. I'm sorry everyone else isn't reasonable. Now, for the update. Thanks for sticking around for more of what's been going on. So after the whole mess with T showing up and the fallout with my stepmom, things just spiraled. My phone was blowing up with messages from my siblings, each one more heated than the last. They were all echoing the same thing. V should apologize to keep the peace. I couldn't believe it. I mean, V was just being kind to T, and now she's being painted as the villain? Then, 2 days ago, my youngest sister, who's always been the peacemaker, dropped a bomb. She said that my stepmom was threatening to not come to our kids' birthdays if V didn't say sorry. That hit hard. The kids adore their grandma, and the thought of them asking why she wasn't there made my stomach turn. But it got worse. My job, which has always been a bit shaky, suddenly became a nightmare. My boss, who's a stickler for family values, got wind of the family drama. He pulled me aside and, in not so many words, suggested that my personal life better not affect my work performance. The pressure was mounting from all sides. V saw the toll it was taking on me. She's got this big heart, you know? She came to me last night, eyes all red, and said she'd apologize to my stepmom. She didn't want to be the reason for more stress or for me to lose my job, but I couldn't let her do that. It wasn't right. I was torn. On one hand, I wanted to protect my wife's dignity. On the other, I was scared of losing the fragile bond with my family and the stability of my job. I felt like I was being pushed into a corner with no good way out. Then, yesterday morning, T came to me. He'd overheard V and me talking. He was upset, saying it was all his fault, and that he'd leave if it meant things would go back to normal. I saw the shame in his eyes, and it hit me. This wasn't just about V or me. It was about standing up for what's right for T, too. I made a decision. I called a family meeting, something we hadn't done in years. I invited everyone, my dad, stepmom, siblings, and of course, V and T. It was tense when everyone arrived. You could cut the air with a knife. I laid it all out. I told them how V was only offering shelter to T, how she didn't deserve to be bullied into an apology, and how we should be supporting T, not tearing him down. I admitted that I was scared of losing my family again, but I couldn't stand by and watch my wife be mistreated. There was silence after I finished. Then, to my surprise, my dad spoke up. He admitted that things had gotten out of hand and that maybe we all owed V an apology instead. My stepmom was quiet, but she nodded. It was like a dam had broken. One by one, my siblings started to see the situation for what it was. They began to apologize to V and T. The meeting ended with hugs, some tears, and a promise to try and do better by each other. My stepmom even pulled V aside and, in a low voice, said she was sorry. It wasn't loud or public, but it was a start. As for my job, I went in today, ready to face whatever came. But my boss just gave me a nod and said he hoped things were better at home. No threats, no warnings. It was like he respected the fact that I'd handled my personal business. So, here we are, a week later, and it feels like we've come through a storm. V is relieved, T is smiling again, and my family, well, we're working on it. It's not perfect, but it's a step in the right direction. Thanks for reading. My sister-in-law excludes my wheelchair-bound daughter from her wedding. So I cancel our attendance and throw a better party at home with the bridesmaid bringing cake to us. Instead, I have 2 daughters, 5 and 14. My 14-year-old suffers from chronic illness and has been an ambulatory wheelchair user for the past 4 years. My sister-in-law, husband's sister, is getting married in July. She used to have a good relationship with my eldest, but since she started having health issues, it's like she couldn't be bothered with her. I've also gotten the impression sometimes that she thinks my daughter is faking, because she doesn't understand how sometimes my daughter is seemingly fine and sometimes basically bedbound. During the first year of my youngest daughter's life, I was dealing with a sick 9-year-old no one could diagnose and a newborn, and no one in my husband's family cared about anything but my youngest daughter. I feel like a lot of that hurt is also lingering now, and maybe that's part of my reaction, just to honestly give both sides. Anyway, she asked for my husband to be a groomsman and my youngest to be a flower girl in her wedding, which we said yes to. My older daughter was not asked to be anything in particular, which did annoy me, but I figured it's because she'd aged out of the cute flower girl stuff and is too young to be a bridesmaid. That is, until I find out one of my husband's cousins, who is 15, will be a bridesmaid. I talked to my husband about it, and he didn't feel like it was a slight at the time. My daughter was very upset when I let her know, but we said it's probably just due to limitations on how many people can be in the party. And admittedly, sister-in-law is very close with that cousin. She lived with her for a few years. My final straw is now I have been informed that parts of the wedding venue are not wheelchair accessible. It's a historical building, so it isn't required to be ADA compliant. The reception is accessible, the ceremony sort of is. But it will be a headache, and the getting ready rooms and bathrooms are up a flight of stairs. There is an outside bathroom at the adjacent park. So if my daughter needs her chair that day, she will be expected to exit the venue and go to a public restroom instead. I will have to handle this all on my own, because my husband will be busy doing groomsmen things. My husband brought up these concerns to mother-in-law and sister-in-law and was basically brushed off. An exact quote I got is, "She can deal with having to walk up some stairs for one night." My mama bear activated, and I am livid. Husband isn't the happiest, but says the wedding isn't about us and let's just get through it. At this point, I want to pull my younger daughter from the wedding party. They clearly don't care about my family and just want to use my youngest as a cute prop. Honestly, if it was up to me, we'd skip the wedding altogether or just send my husband, but that would explode into so much family drama we don't want to deal with. My husband does not want to pull our daughter. He doesn't want the drama and has correctly pointed out our youngest will be devastated. She loves her dress and has been pretend practicing for weeks. He thinks we'd be punishing her for something that isn't her fault. In my opinion, sometimes life isn't fair, and it's a good lesson for my daughter that we do the right thing, especially by family, even if it's hard for us or we have to sacrifice something, especially when that involves standing up for communities that get so often looked over. My older daughter has also said she'd feel better about it if her sister was pulled. Am I the idiot? Now, for a few comments before the update. Comment 1, why am I? The last paragraph did it for me. Quote, "Sometimes life isn't fair, and it's a good lesson for my daughter that we do the right thing, especially by family, even if it's hard for us or we have to sacrifice something, especially if that involves standing up for communities that often get looked over. My older daughter said she would feel better about it if her sister was pulled." Unquote. Yes, it is a teachable moment for your daughter. Not the youngest, but the eldest. Sometimes in life, you don't get what you want, especially at someone else's wedding. Yes, it's a shame the venue isn't ADA, it's a historical building, and there are some things that can't be accessed by a wheelchair. You even say that part of the venue is accessible, though a headache and the reception is totally accessible. What is wrong with your daughter attending where she can? Seems to me like the eldest daughter is the golden child and is used to getting her own way through you. You don't get to make demands on someone else's wedding, and you don't get to say if your daughter is a bridesmaid or not. Comment 2. You're the idiot. I do understand your predicament, but you gotta realize life isn't supposed to be fair, and you can't make one daughter sad just to make the other happy, and I doubt she would be. Your perceived fairness won't make your oldest feel loved. All it does is create more resentment between your children. Think of it this way. If your oldest is too sick all the time that she can't attend college and enjoy college life, Are you going to try to be fair again and tell your youngest that she won't be allowed this opportunity either when she graduates HS? I hope your answer is no, because you'd be nuts if you do that to your youngest daughter. What you have is an opportunity to help your oldest learn how to cope with her condition and learn how to turn a negative into a positive, because you can't always be there to level the playing field for her. So it's important that she learns not to take a slight from everything when things don't go her way. Now, for the update. Thanks for sticking around for more on what's been happening. So, after all the drama with the wedding planning, things took a turn for the worse. My eldest, who's been struggling with her health, had a particularly bad flare-up. It was one of those days where she couldn't even get out of bed. Seeing her like that, it hit me hard. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being pushed aside by my husband's family, especially now. I remember when she was first diagnosed, the confusion and fear we all felt. It was a time when we needed support the most, but it felt like we were on our own. My husband's family, they just didn't get it. They'd see her on a good day and assume she was all better, like chronic illness is something you can just shake off. It's been a constant battle, not just with her health, but with getting them to understand. Then out of the blue, my husband's cousin, the 15-year-old bridesmaid, reached out to my eldest. She wanted to spend time with her, said she missed her. They used to be close, before everything. It was a small gesture, but it meant the world. It was like a little bit of light in all this mess. But back to the wedding. My husband and I had it out over pulling our youngest from the wedding party. He was adamant about not causing a scene, but I couldn't let it go. It felt like we were being asked to choose between our daughters, and that's not a choice any parent should have to make. The day before the wedding, my youngest overheard us arguing. She's a smart cookie, picked up on more than we thought. She came to us, her little dress in hand, and said she didn't want to be a flower girl if it meant her sister couldn't be part of the wedding. My heart nearly broke. She shouldn't have to think about these things, but there she was, showing more empathy than the adults. It was a wake-up call for my husband. He finally saw that this wasn't just about avoiding drama. It was about standing up for our family. We decided, as a family, that we wouldn't go to the wedding. It was a tough call, but it felt right. The fallout was immediate. My sister-in-law was furious, said we were ruining her day. My mother-in-law called us selfish. But something strange happened too. Some family members, the ones we hadn't heard from in a while, they reached out. They said they understood, that they'd been uncomfortable with how things were handled too. The day of the wedding, we did our own thing. We had a little celebration at home, just the four of us. We ordered in from my eldest's favorite restaurant, watched her favorite movies, and just were together. It wasn't the day we expected, but in a way, it was perfect. And then, the surprise. My husband's cousin, the bridesmaid, she left the wedding early. Showed up at our doorstep, still in her dress, with a piece of cake for my eldest. She said the wedding didn't feel right without us there. It was a small act, but it spoke volumes. It showed us who our real family was. Thanks for reading. If you liked this video, you'll probably like these too. Also, while you're here, please consider subscribing. It's your support that keeps this channel alive and allows me to make better and longer videos. Have a great day. Have a great